we're going live here on Facebook. Okay, so Haraim Tovim, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining me for another delving deeper. Oops, that's not what I wanted. For another delving deeper into Jewish prayer. I am Rabbi David Grundland, and if you're here with me, you probably already know that, but I still like to introduce myself. I'm the host of the show. Okay, so what we are doing, if you are not aware, in this delving deeper into Jewish prayer series, is we are actually looking at the Jewish prayers. We're looking at the tefillot that we say on a daily basis. And there is something that's so important when it comes to how we relate to the words in our sidurim, right? Part of the impetus for this class is that we all go through these words and we think minimally about what they actually mean and what the implications are of what we're saying. I think sadly enough, the same is true, not just of our prayers when it is a set text in a book, but it is actually true when it comes to our own words, the things we say, the words that come out of our mouth. Often we are not aware of the implications of our words, what we say, and how that could affect people positively or negatively. And that's not just in the moment, but also in a reflection on those words. And it could also be on the, I'm going to say, the psychological imprint of those words. Sometimes the words we say or the words we hear will have an impact on us or on others well beyond the moment that those words were spoken. Now, that works on a few different levels. The most basic level is, we can use, for example, this class. Right now, today is January 27th, 2021, but this is being recorded and somebody can watch it on Facebook on January 28th or 29th or 30th. It will also be uploaded to YouTube. So somebody could watch it, I don't know, 5, 10, 20 years from now. And at the same time, while that time has dissipated, the words that I am saying now will have an impact whenever they are being viewed or heard down the road. And that's on a very simple level. On a much deeper level, there are things that I had teachers tell me decades ago, which in a current context kind of pop up in my mind and ring true, and they inspire me, they uplift me, and they give me the strength to move forward and do the things that I do. Those words are having an impact far beyond the day and time that they were offered. Now, the goal of tefillah, the goal of Jewish prayer, is not just to read words in a book. The goal of Jewish prayer is that every time we open the Siddur, the Jewish prayer book, we should be transformed by the words we are saying. It is supposed to be a transformative experience of what we call prayer. But more accurately, we should use the Hebrew term tefillah, because tefillah and prayer, as we've discussed previously, are quite different. Just again, for a quick refresher, because I think it's an important refresher, prayer is, please may I have, God give me, give me, give me. Tefillah is an introspective expression. Tefillah is about being introspective, knowing my hopes and dreams and inner desires, and then being able to verbalize them and express them. And here we have the set text, which is supposed to empower us and enable us to have that vision, to think about the things we're quote unquote supposed to be thinking of, or that are good to think of, and then take that and work towards making that our experience of ourselves and of the world. It should be our inner experience. It should be a reflection of our outer experience. In Jungian psychoanalysis, we should have a synchronistic view of ourselves within the world and the world that exists within ourselves. And also ourselves as part of the greater world. And this is very important because this actually has a lot to do with what we're going to talk about today. Last week, we spoke a lot about creation and the way God creates the world and created the world with darkness and with light, and imbuing creation with light, and the fact that God gave us the ability to also do that. And we in our own lives can bring about light, good things, happy things, and we can bring about darkness and sad things and painful things. And so now we're going to go further into that idea. And actually our Siddur takes us further into that idea, right? Those were our headings. Now, it really was. It was the blessing that opens this whole section of Tefillah that we are calling the Birkot Kriyat Shema, the blessings of the Shema Yisrael recitation, bringing down into our own experiences the concept of God's unity, of Hashem Echad. And we're going to explore that. We're going to explore different experiences of that, different approaches to that idea, in different ways that we in our own lives can recognize, see, and the way we do encounter that in our own lives. So if you are following along in the text, we are in the Art Scroll English Hebrew Siddur on page 84 in Shacharit. You can find it again in the Shabbat morning prayers, but it'll actually be in a box at the bottom on page 406, actually for holidays that are taking place during the week. We will at some point move to the Shabbat phrasing, because on Shabbat there is different phrasing. For now, we're just in the week. And so again, page 84, it says at the bottom, Hameir la'aretz v'ladarim aleha berachamim, uvtuvo mechadesh bechol yom tamid ma'aseh vereshit. So what does this say? The translation here is, He, God, provides illumination for the earth and for those who dwell upon it with compassion. And in his goodness, he renews it daily, perpetually, the work of creation. That's the first sentence. That is the introduction to this whole next paragraph, where we're going to break down the idea of light and dark. And we're going to understand the way that God does impact and influence the world on a constant, what do they say here? On a daily and perpetual level, right? Bechol yom tamid, every day, always, perpetually. Now, the word me'ir, it comes from the word or, light, as we discussed last week, that when God initializes creation, it says, Vayomer Elokim Yehi Or, and God said, let there be light, Vayahi Or, and there was light. Now, we often think about this, that, there's God sitting in his office, and he's, got the blueprints for the universe in front of him, and he's drawing it out, and God doesn't have a pen, he just has a voice operated computer system. And he said, let there be light. And all of a sudden there was light in the room, and that's pretty good. I can see things better now, right? That's what we imagine in our heads. But I think as adults, we can all recognize that sounds more like a fairy tale. That's a child's story. That's not what's going on. God is not sitting at a desk creating light, right? What we do have, though, is we have an image of there being darkness, and into that darkness, light coming in. The way we talked about that last week, we used a Kabbalistic basis for it, where we said, based on the description of Rabbi Chaim Vital, in the name of his teacher, the Ari, who is famous from Tzfat, as one of the top Kabbalists of Tzfat about 500 years ago, that God is this infinite light that goes in all directions, and it wanted the opportunity to be called by its names of righteousness of compassion and mercy, to be merciful and compassionate. So it needed some other for whom it could be those things. And so in the middle of its infinite expanse of light, it created a space. It withdrew the light and created this void expanse that is called the Tzimtzum and the opening called the Halal HaPanui, the empty void. And into that, God injected a tiny little amount of the infinite light, which was the building blocks for the finite creation that we have now. In modern parlance, some people like to view that Kav Hayashar, that straight little bit of light, as like that was the moment of the Big Bang, where seemingly nothing expanded into everything that we experience, right? That was the moment of Yehi Or, that stuff could exist, right? And what we talk, when science talks about that, they talk about that on the level of particles and protons and electrons and even photons, right? Light energy. That these are the things that came into the universe in that first moment. And that is what, those became the building blocks of what we have. Now, it's the idea that this happened and that God did this with mercy and with compassion, right? It was done to Aretz, and it was done for all those that dwell on Aretz, with compassion. So first off, what is Aretz? We all know at the beginning of the Torah, it says, Bereshit bara Elokim et hashamayim ve'et Aretz. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And we all like to think that the heavens are the sky and the earth is the ground under our feet. I would venture to say that is inaccurate. That heavens are everything that we can't possibly experience as part of creation. It might exist simultaneous to creation. Heaven exists here around us at all times, but it is those parts of creation that we don't get to experience. And earth is that part of creation that we do get to experience. And so everything that anyone gets to experience, there is great mercy and compassion there. The fact that we get to experience the earth. It's quite timely. This evening begins Tu B'Shvat, the 15th of the month of Shvat, which is called a Rosh Hashanah La'ilanot, the New Year for the trees. And what that means is a whole other discussion. But on a very simple level, it is a time that nowadays people utilize to appreciate nature and all of the things about nature that we take for granted, like the fact that trees give fruit that we then get to pick and enjoy, and we can then take a seed from that fruit and we can plant it and grow a whole new tree and repeat the cycle. And meanwhile, that first tree is still producing more and more. These are gifts in nature that we take for granted. And these are great compassion that God has had on us as part of nature and on the entire natural flow of things, that it all exists and it all works as a holistic and symbiotic, properly functioning, well-oiled machine that we just get to be part of. And we don't need to think more about it. We're just there. So Tu B'Shvat is a time where we say, I'm not going to take this for granted. And this tefillah that we say every single morning is all about that. Don't take anything for granted. It was all put together in this way out of a sense of compassion so that we could live a good life, so that there could be such a thing as a good life on this world. Now, I want to also go into the end of the sentence quickly, the idea of God constantly renewing creation. Now, when it comes to the idea of light, especially in science, when science says what is light, what are light particles, what we call photons, they have discovered that light simultaneously, at the exact same time, exists in two different forms. One, sine is like a wave, right? One part of light is connected to the previous part of life, but light is also an individual particle, right? Each light particle exists independent of what happened before, of where it came from, of what happened before the very moment at which it was observed.
Mm.
This is something that is also known as a quantum universe, that light can exist in both of these states, right? And it exists in a state of pure potential until it has been observed. So too with our experience in the world, right? What's the most famous way that this has been discussed in the past? If a tree falls in the forest and nobody's around to hear it, it doesn't make a sound, right? I would dare to ask a second question. If a tree falls in the forest and no one's around to observe it, did the tree actually fall down, or was it just lying there the whole time? Or was it taken off and put down? How did it get from one place to the other? Or did it grow and just magically appear there? If nobody's ever seen it before, we can assume based on the way we understand things, oh, it must have fallen previously, and it probably made, generated sound waves, but those were never heard by anybody. So that's the way we would like to think about it. But what do we know, right? There's a very famous thought, a thought question, which is, if we were created in this very moment, right, and no moment before this very moment ever existed, but we were created at this moment with all the memories of all those previous moments, how would we be able to tell if those previous moments ever actually existed, or if we were just created in this moment with memories of that past existence, right? We can't actually know, right? It's a very powerful thought experiment, because what it does is it forces us to comprehend our lives in these two realms of light, if you will. On the one hand, we have to look at our lives as a wave. I had yesterday, I had the day before that, I had the year before that. I've had my whole life until this very moment. And in fact, the whole world and all of creation has had the last 5,000 years of human evolution that got us to this very point, or of where we are in our current evolutionary stage. And it also had 4.5 billion years of the evolution of planet Earth, and it also had 16.5 billion years of universal expansion and evolution, whatever that means. Those numbers are way too big for my mind to grasp. I like to think I can understand what that is, but I can't. A year goes by or a day goes by and I'm already lost. A year ago today, I flew back from being in Israel for a week, and I was talking to a friend a couple of days ago who I saw last on that trip, and we both commented that it felt like I saw him yesterday, but it also feels like it was 10 years ago. Like, so much has happened in the last year since that trip. And this inability for us to really grasp and comprehend time, it's the importance of keeping time. It's why we keep time. But at the same time, it's very hard for us to really fathom anything beyond this very moment. And so what happens is we're left with this dual nature of the way that God creates the world as a sign and as a particle, that God is creating the world perpetually. It is this ongoing thing. And at the same time, it's mechadesh b'chol yom. It is new at every day. It is new in every moment. I remember learning many years ago that apparently some scientists, I don't know exactly who, I imagine physicists, discovered that electrons pop in and out of existence almost at random, pretty much once every 6 billionth of a second, or 6 millionth of a second. That electrons are just, they're there and they're gone, they're there and they're gone. Now, we don't experience it. It's too fast for the human mind to grasp, but it's there and it's gone. The world is constantly renewing itself in a moment. Now, this is also true over time, right? Again, Tu B'Shvat is now. This is a time where we say the roots of the trees are starting to draw in the nutrients from the soil in order to bring about the next year's produce. right? So even though here in Toronto it looks very snowy outside, and in Israel it is quite green, this is really where the trees are starting to bring in the nutrients that will feed them and grow them for next year. And this is again the renewal of the seasons and the renewal of nature. It happens over time, from season to season, from year to year. And it happens in our lives from day to day. I wake up in the morning, I go to sleep at night. Right? It happens many processes in our lives. It happens with the idea of life itself. And all of these things exist in all of these levels simultaneously. In one moment, it is a sign. Every moment is connected to the one before it. And at the same time, every moment is unique to itself. This is what this tefillah is starting us off with. When we're supposed to be approaching God and saying God is one, and we're supposed to be building ourselves up to a mindset to understand the idea of God's unity, it is to understand that God is simultaneously responsible for both of those experiences, for the experience of life as a wave, life as a constant flow, and for the experience of life in a moment. And that the only moment that matters is this very moment right now. Now, we're going to take this one step further by going to the next sentence. The next sentence says, Ma rabu ma'asecha Hashem, kulam b'chokhma asita, mal'ah ha'aretz kinyanecha, which says, how great are your works, or how plentiful are your works. God, everything you made was with wisdom, and the whole world is full, or all of existence is full of your possessions, right? You're responsible. All of this is yours, right? You own and acquire and have rule, I suppose, over all of existence as we know it and as we experience it. So again, we come to the idea of God's unity. God is above it all, and God flows through it all, which is when we think about the name Hashem, right? Marabu Masacha Hashem, Yud Kei Vav Kei. It is above existence. It flows through existence. It is part of existence. And everything is made with wisdom. Now, before we got started, there was a question. And before the question was asked, it was said, can I ask a question? Is that okay? And I said, of course it's okay. Questioning is what it's all about. If we're not asking those questions, then how are we going to actually get deeper? How are we actually going to delve deeper? Right? I can tell you as much deep and cool stuff as I want, but in order to get further down the rabbit hole, as it were, questions will really elicit that response. Now, the word chokhmah that is said here, kulam b'chokhmah asita, everything you made was with wisdom. This word chokhmah is a very interesting word in Jewish thought. And because when we think of wisdom, we are not just thinking of, some nice idea, right? There's a lot of wisdom in the world. We're not just thinking about a nice idea. When we say wisdom on a human level, the way the Torah understands that, Judaism tends to understand wisdom, it's that spark, right? The spark that gave the scientist an idea to say, you know what, instead of making vaccines out of the actual illness itself, out of the actual disease itself, let's see if we can create an mRNA vaccine, something that we will not need to utilize the illness itself, but it will be a protein that will enable the body to learn how to fight the illness without having the illness on any level. Who got that idea? That's craziness to me. Now, I guess if you're in the world of science, it's probably less crazy, but who was the first one who said, let's try this? Think about the first person who said, listen, we develop immunity when we get sick. Let's see if we can actually inject the sickness into somebody on a low level, and if that will generate immunity, right? The idea of a vaccine in the first place that took wisdom, right? It is the first spark of a thought is called wisdom. right? The proverbial light bulb, bing, right? It goes off, and then what? All of a sudden you have all the plans? No. If we think back to all of our Bugs Bunny cartoons where there was that bing, light bulb came up, what was the next step? It wasn't a light bulb with all the blueprints in it. It was a light bulb with an idea. And then the next scene is sitting down at the drawing board, drawing out the blueprints for whatever the idea was. And that's not chokhmah. The drawing out of the blueprints is something called the bina, understanding. We have that spark, that motivation, that thing that kind of lights us up. And then we have to take it to the next level ourselves. It is an active experience at that point.
What's
Chokhmah,
the Hebrew word?
bina. You could spell it B-I-N-A or Bet Yud Nun Hey. Some will say it's tivuna is also a similar word for it.
Okay, Rabbi, just while we're paused for a sec.
Yeah.
So you said before we got onto the Chachma, Hashem is responsible for life, both as a flow and in the moment. And then I don't know if it was editorial or I didn't understand it properly. And you said, and we should be concerned about the moment.
Well, we need to recognize life in context of the flow. But we also have to live in the moment, right? If we think about, the modern school of mindfulness meditation, it is about being aware of a moment. If we even think about halakha, Jewish law is about how are we living in a moment? What do I do? Which step should I take next? What is my way to go now? Now, it doesn't mean we shouldn't plan for the future, and it doesn't mean we shouldn't reflect on the past. But the goal and the key to being able to experience life to its fullest is about taking advantage of and experiencing the present moment, right? Just taking it in, not judging it as how will this affect tomorrow, not judging it as, oh, this is just because of all this stuff in the past, but what's going on right now, and how can I come to terms with the experience of this moment, recognizing that fundamentally, once this moment is past, it will never come again, right? The one thing that is entirely limited in our lives is time, because once a moment is past, it is gone forever, right?
Okay, thanks.
So we have to try our best to live with this moment, right? What's the there's something about when people think too much about the past, they live with too much guilt, and people who think too much about the future live with too much anxiety, because you're always worried about what's coming next. But then there's people who live in the moment who have the gift of life. That's why it's the present, something along those lines. Anyway, so back to our present moment. In order to recognize chokhmah, we need to be present in the moment. If we're so busy thinking about what was or what will be, then when that proverbial light bulb goes off, if we have those moments of deep inner awareness of our own thoughts, of our own desires, of anything in this moment, we'll miss it, right? You need to be tied into the moment. If you're not connected to the moment, it gets overrun with so many other ideas. But it also takes wisdom to be able to filter out all that other stuff. We need to know in our hearts, really, what is the right thing to be focused on? How should I focus my energy? What should I be dedicating my attention to in this moment? And that's what our tefillot are supposed to be doing for us in that moment. It's supposed to be tying us to that idea. Now, there's a teaching in the Zohar, which is like the big book of Kabbalah. It's actually a conversation that was had between Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Eliezer, who was one of his teachers. And in this conversation, Rabbi Akiva is telling Rabbi Eliezer about this concept in this line, Kulam bechokhma asita, which is actually a quote from the book of Tehillim, from the book of Psalms, which are the prayers of King David. So King David is the one who said this. And Rabbi Akiva says King David in that moment was in the midst of running away from his enemies, and he found himself hiding out in a field. And he looked around the field and he said, wow. It wasn't about the fact he was being chased. It wasn't about the fact that he had to get away and he was concerned about his life. He just looked around and he said, everything that is happening right now, the fact that I find myself in this very place where I am in this moment, what an amazing place I am in. Look at the nature that surrounds me. And so Rabbi Akiva says, so too is it supposed to be our relationship with nature. That when we look at the world, we're supposed to recognize that everything has wisdom. That when God created the world, right, even though we experience wisdom as that flash, when God created the world, it was created in a flash, I suppose you could say, but it was created with the idea that every single thing we experience and encounter can cause that flash. That when we look at the world with the right kind of eyes and we recognize that the entire world is full of God's light, right, as we talked about last week and a little bit today, when everything is full of God's light, that we have an opportunity to recognize that light. So when I see a particular tree in front of me, if I was sitting outside, I could look at what kind of tree, and I could find wisdom, chokhmah, in what kind of tree is in front of me. I could find wisdom in the way the branches of that tree grow and the direction in which the tree is leaning and how many leaves are there and the shape of those leaves. And is the tree isolated by itself, or is it in the middle of a grassy field or a front lawn or a backyard hanging over a fence? And all of those details can convey chokhmah. When I see bugs and critters living on that tree or in that tree, I can learn chokhmah. I can learn something from that. And Rabbi Akiva said that our whole life experience is supposed to be one in which everything that we encounter in our lives is there for us to learn something. Yeah. That moment is a unique moment that God put us in at that moment because there was something there for us to connect to. And so
would be a terrific example of that, I think, would be Newton.
Yeah, apple, right? Oh, things fall down. What's that all about, right? That's exactly it, right? Things fall down. Let me understand from this concept of falling. Why do things fall, right? And the chokhmah, the flash, remember we said working on that and extracting that deeper meaning, that is not an act of chokhmah, that is an act of bina, of understanding. The chokhmah is that first moment of apple falls, hits me on the head, and I say, ouch, that's weird, why do things fall? What elicited that particular question? Why was that the reaction and not just, ow, stupid apple tree, let me cut you down, right? Or let me pick all these apples and then I'll at least have food to eat and it will have been a worthwhile bump on the head. Why was the next step exactly what it was? Of why do things fall? Let me understand this better, right? That first question, why do things fall? That saying, there's something deeper here. Let me look for that deeper thing, right? That is chokhmah. And so we're saying that within our experience of the world, every moment is an opportunity to find chokhmah, because Hashem created the world in such a way that everything at every time is an opportunity for chokhmah, for wisdom. And we have to look for it, and we have to find it, and from it we have to not just learn about it, but then we have to grow with it. We have to understand it better, and we have to integrate that into our own life experience. So good, it's nice, we're learning this stuff in the text of the Siddur. But if tomorrow morning, when we're going through these tefillot, there's not even a semblance of a thought at the back of our mind of like, oh, there's some really deep stuff in this line that has to do with the idea of chokhmah and wisdom and understanding, but I'm just going to go through it because that's what we're doing right now. If there's not even that little flash of a thought, then okay, it's fine that we learned it, but it's academic. It has no legs in the real world. If I go out after this for a walk, and all of a sudden I notice that there's a gust of wind and it blows a particular tree in a particular way, and I don't think of, wow, how does wind work, and why did that gust of wind come at exactly this moment, and what is the deeper message that God is trying to convey to me in this very moment, then I've missed it. I've missed an opportunity to connect to something deeper, to connect to some kind of divine wisdom in that moment. Now, that's not to say that this is an easy thing to do at all times. In fact, it's a mostly impossible thing to do at all times, because we're human and we go through our lives and we just do what we do, which is important. And that's, a very important way to live in the world. But it's also very important to make sure we have these opportunities and we take these opportunities to reflect, if even for a moment, to try to connect to that divine wisdom. I'm interestingly reminded of a movie right now, of the movie Bruce Almighty. I don't remember exactly what year. This was a Jim Carrey movie. Morgan Freeman was in it as well. Morgan Freeman plays God. He's got a very good, deep God voice. Have you ever thought about that? Why does God always have to have a deep voice, right? Like, if you think of God at the burning bush, Moses. What if God was like, Moses, go to Egypt? It would just ruin the whole thing, right? Anyway, Morgan Freeman has a very good, deep God voice. And in this movie, Bruce Almighty, Jim Carrey's character, Bruce, is yelling at God, just give me a sign, please. And, then there's a sign on the road that says like, pull over, or like, and he's distracted. So he doesn't notice the sign that says pull over. And then there's another sign, and he's saying, I just want a sign, give me anything. And then there's another one that says like, bridge out, stop now. And, it doesn't notice that. And then he, he's like, has his phone and drops his phone. And then, before he drops his phone, there's a truck that pulls in front of him, which is full of street signs, stop signs and yield signs and red traffic light signs. And like every sign in the world is right in front of him. And God, give me a sign, right? There's, until finally he drops his cell phone and crashes into that truck that was telling him to stop. Anyway, but that's the idea. There are always signs in front of us, always things for us to catch and to watch out for and to look for in our lives. And we go through life and we're so distracted that we miss most of them, right? And they still come. They keep coming. They're always there, right? One missed opportunity does not mean we've necessarily missed it forever. It just means we missed that particular call, right? And there's another joke that I've heard that I think is applicable to it, which is in terms of the way we just live our lives, right? That there was once a very heavy hurricane and the city was flooding, and there was a person who was standing outside of his house, and an emergency vehicle comes by and says, get in, we're evacuating, you got to get in, we'll get you to safety. He says, no, God will save me. Car drives away, right? Water keeps going and it covers the whole house. This guy's now sitting on the roof of his house, and a boat comes driving by and says, hop in the boat, we'll get you to safety. And he says, God will save me. Right? And then the boat drives away. Then the water's getting higher and higher, and the water level reaches up to his neck, and he's just got his head just above water. and a helicopter flies by and lowers a ladder, and he says, grab onto the ladder, we'll pull you to safety, we'll fly you away out of here to safety, God will save me. And, helicopter's okay, whatever you want, flies away. The guy drowns, and he gets up to heaven, and he says, God, I was waiting for you to save me. And God looks at him and he said, I sent you an emergency vehicle, I sent you a boat, I sent you a helicopter. Like, what do you want from me? Right? This is the way things work, right?
So,
this is
Rabbi,
the way that we engage with God, and God engages with us. It's through the apple falling on our head, and it's through the truck that pulls in front of us. But it's our responsibility to find and look for the chokhmah, because everything was created with chokhmah. The way your cameras are on the Zoom, what I see in your background has chokhmah. It has lessons for me to see you and your background. What's going on behind me is, on a particular level, a lesson for you and what's going on in my background. These are all different levels of the same concept. Anyway, Monty, yes, you're going to ask something.
So this may be for a whole other section, but your comment about, go through the tefillah, and if you don't pick something out, you've missed it. So again, I'm constantly battling with this. Oh, there's an interesting thought, but they're carrying on.
Mm-hmm.
So I need to find a way to reconcile that.
Yeah, me too.
Okay.
Yeah, me too. There's an interesting thing, like I said, we don't give ourselves enough time for davening. There is and I'm actually, what I'm going to say now is almost new to me also. Not the first part, but the second part. The first part of what I'm going to say is a teaching by the Baal Shem Tov, Rabbi Israel ben Eliezer, who was the founder of the modern Hasidic movement in the early 1700s. And he had a teaching when it came to prayer, that there is a long-standing Jewish teaching that says if you're supposed to be focused on the words on the page, and you're supposed to be focused on thoughts of God and of the tefillot, of the prayers themselves. And if you get distracted, or if some foreign thought comes into your mind, so the advice was always push that foreign thought aside and refocus yourself onto the words. And that's the prevailing teaching. You can really only think one thing at a time. So if you have that foreign thought pop up, push it away and get back to pray. But the Baal Shem Tov said something different. He said, you should look at that foreign thought, and you should say, why is that the thought that is coming up for me now? What am I saying in the prayers that is bringing up that thought, that is distracting me from what I want to say? And he said, you should chase it, and you should pursue it. And by doing that, you will be able to return that thought to its source, right? Now, this goes back to what we talked about last week. And I realized a lot of people couldn't join us last week because it was the inauguration of the 46th American president, which is a valid reason to not be here. That's a big thing. The video is up on YouTube. It is still on the Beth Emes Facebook page, so you should definitely go check it out. But part of our discussion was when it comes to a bracha, the purpose of a bracha, and really the purpose of so much of our lives, is to return something to its source, or reconnect it to its source. And that source is obviously God, the unity that we call God, that underlying flow of nature within every wave function and within every particle function, right? Every flow and every point, that whatever is animating that, our goal with every bracha is to connect things and return them to their source. So the Baal Shem Tov said about these foreign thoughts, everything has its source in God, whether that's good or whether that's bad, like we said last week, right? Yotzer or uvore choshech, right? Oseh shalom uvore et ha-ra, that God creates light and dark, God creates good and evil, right? It's that this is really the point, he would say, is to connect that foreign thought back to its source. And so therefore you have to acknowledge the thought, and you have to tie it back into the tefillah that it came up. So if we were saying, right, what we're saying right now, if I was at this point of my tefillot tomorrow, and as I was saying kulam b'chokhmah sita, I had a thought of I'm trying to think what's going on at that point during the service. So my kids aren't listening upstairs. I can hear them not listening to their mother upstairs, right? Kind of thing. That my wife's trying to get them into their classrooms because everything is on Zoom now. She's trying to get them into their Zoom classroom, and they're not listening, and that's a huge distraction for me, right? Whenever I hear that going on, so that goes on at that moment. And what is my first thought? My first thought is normally like, "Oi, I hope everybody else on the other side of the camera doesn't hear what's going on up there." Right? I hope the rest of the group who's there for our tefillot on Zoom is not hearing it through my microphone. And so I can look at that and I can say, well, what is the wisdom in a few things? What is Hashem trying to teach me about the fact that even in the midst of my tefillot, there are disturbances coming from my household? What can I learn from that? Should I be pausing my tefillot to go there? Is it just a reminder? Don't forget, as you're saying these tefillot, you have a family that you need to be also davening for, and you need to be thinking about how Hashem is in your family and part of your family. And so, David, pay attention to their needs. And, even while you're here doing this, pay attention to what not just the people on the screen need, but the people who are off screen, what they might need. Think about what might be going on in the background for everybody else. Maybe that's what a thought is supposed to be. Maybe my thought I should be asking the question of, why is my first worry about, I hope nobody else is hearing this? Why am I not thinking about, I hope everything's okay up there? Hashem, let my kids, just make my own little prayer. Hashem, let my kids listen to their mother better and get into their class and stop fighting against going to school in the morning, which I can't imagine being on Zoom school all day. It sounds torturous to me. But regardless, for all of these are opportunities for thought. These are opportunities for questioning, and these are opportunities to try to explore deeper chokhmah, deeper wisdom. But again, as we're saying, it's not always easy to connect to that in the moment because we're going through. And before I've had the opportunity to really have that thought, the shaliach tzibur, whoever's leading the tefillot, is already on to the next paragraph. And we ideally would say Shema Yisrael together in one collective voice. And so I got to keep my tefillot going also. So the new thought that I actually just had in this moment as we're having this conversation now was, maybe it's worthwhile to have a pencil with me in the middle of my tefillot and just to mark with an asterisk the spot where a foreign thought popped up, and to explore a little deeper into that idea. The way we're talking now, let me read it, let me see, let me think about what happened at that moment, so I can come back to it and reflect on it later, right? It's a way to try to find the balance between the delving deeper, which we can do now for an hour on 2 sentences, or the delving deeper that I don't have time in the middle of my tefillot, but I'm going to hold the thought in the back of my mind as I say these 2 sentences. There's always potential for more. There's always potential for more depth. And even if I stop it there, even if we stop our thought process as when we say kulam b'chokhmah sita, saying, I know there's always more to this. And I just don't have time for that right now because we're part of a communal tefillah. So cool, let me run through it. Let me just go. I don't have to worry about it, right? I know there's more. And so the fact that I know there's more is already a very high level of delving deeper into our tefillot. I think we're going to stop now. The next lines go back to the idea of God's unity, that it is God who is overseeing all of this. God is the Melech, God is the king of it all. And God is the one who gives the opportunity for there to be deeper levels. And the more we engage within these deeper levels, we go up from level to level to level, right? It's one of the great paradoxes of Judaism and Jewish thought and the language that we use, that as we delve deeper, we go higher, right? We rise up, right? The deeper we explore into the tefillot, the higher our tefillot can bring us. And I'm going to take it to another level now, which I think is extremely important. The deeper we delve into our own thoughts, and the deeper we delve into our own experiences, the greater we can be. That the further down we go into ourselves, the more we introspect, and we recognize the source of our souls, and we recognize the things that we have the opportunity to do in our lives and throughout our lives, and we can reflect back on our lives and look for the deeper chokhmah in the experiences that I've already had, and what stories I'm remembering in this moment, and why those stories. And the more we go into that on a personal level, the greater of an impact I can have personally on the world, right? The more I go inside, the greater impact I can have outside. And this is the same relationship that we have with our tefillot, which is why it's so important as we go through this. And when I talk about this class, I always say it's about finding the transformational aspects and the psychological underpinnings of our tefillot. Because the same way we talk about our tefillot and the words in the book, and the same way we think about the world around us, when we think about ourselves in the same way, and we use the same concepts to delve deeper into ourselves, that is really the idea of delving deeper into our tefillah. Remember, that introspective envisioning of what I would love to see in the world, or what the world appears like to me, and then taking that and trying to express it and manifest it in reality. That is our delving deeper into tefillah, into our Jewish prayer. And that is where we're going to end for today. Next week, we'll pick up in the same paragraph with a poem that is an alphabetical acrostic, but that'll be for next week. Thank you, everyone, for joining me for delving deeper into Jewish prayer. And I look forward to seeing everybody, God willing, next week, same time at 12 p.m. on Wednesday. And also a quick reminder that 12 p.m. on Mondays, we also have our how-to of Jewish prayer, which is much more of the technical components that go into the Jewish prayer service. Anyway, once again, thank you, everyone, for joining me. Have a wonderful day. If you have any questions and are watching us on Facebook, or if you're watching this down the road on YouTube, please feel free to put those questions in the comments, and I'll try to answer them to the best of my ability. If you're with us here on Zoom, after I end the Facebook Live feed or stream right now, we can do a little Q&A. Anyway, have a wonderful day, everybody. Take care. Shalom.